Agenda room, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Commissioner.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna leave my camera off for this session.
Hey, Rich. Hey, Rich. Yep.
Thank you all for your patience while we get everybody gathered and all the technology working. This is a public meeting with MISO and SPP. The Commission has scheduled this meeting to discuss the topics of participation in MISO and SPP. Sorry, I can't talk this morning apparently. And about transmission planning, current outlook, updates on the joint targeted interconnection queue, and status updates of the RTO's respective generator interconnection queues, and process reforms. My name is Nancy DePel, and I'm the regulatory law judge, sort of presiding over this public meeting of the commission today. And I would ask, if you are online, if you would mute your microphones, and for that matter, if you would mute your devices here in the hearing room as well. Because this isn't any kind of a case, this is a public meeting, a conversation, anyone can speak when called upon. You don't have to be an attorney or representing a party or so forth. When you do speak, I would ask that you come to a microphone so that everyone online can hear. And we're going to begin with opening remarks from the commission, and then we will have presentations by MISO and SPP or remarks. We will then allow the commissioners will ask questions, and then I will ask for staff if they have any questions, and OPC if they have any questions, and the other utilities and anyone else interested that wants to ask a question as well. So with that, we'll begin with opening remarks by the commissioners. Chair Hahn.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. This is only our second public meeting with our RTOs. And so our first meeting was more of an introductory meeting covering several topics. This meeting is a little bit more narrowly tailored to transmission projects that are planned in the future for MISO, LRTP, for SPP, the ITP, also MTEP for MISO, the JTIQ projects, and Q reform. So those are kind of what we're hoping to cover today. Look forward to hearing from our RTOs and having questions and good discussion from our stakeholders here in the state to figure out if we're on the right path and if we have or need additional information. So thank you all for your participation. Looking forward to the meeting. Thank you.
Commissioner Coleman, did you have any remarks?
Only, I concur with the chairwoman's statements. Thank you all for being here. Looking forward to your presentations today. Thank you.
Commissioner Holzman, anything? And
Yes, just I want to thank everybody for being here, and we look forward to the presentation.
Commissioner Coleman or Kochmeyer? Sorry.
Same thing. Welcome, and I look forward to the presentation today.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, I'd like to say just thanks so much for being here, and thanks to the chair for putting this together. As a new commissioner and as someone who's still on the steep end of the learning curve, I appreciate the opportunity to get educated on the issues that are most important to you and important to the commission, and become more informed. So I'm very grateful for you being here.
Thank you. With that, I think we can begin with the presentation from MISO.
Thank you, and welcome, Madam Chair and the rest of the commissioners. I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Bob Kuzman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Central Region. I have joining somebody that's just joined my team, Mason Bleem, former staff at the Iowa, at that time, board, and now it's the Iowa Utility Commission. Also doing the real work today will be the two people to my right or your left. Aubrey Johnson, Vice President of Transmission Planning, and Laura Rauch, Executive Director of Everything in System Planning. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to do, I think we have 6 to 8 slides that we can walk through to hopefully address some of your questions and concerns, but obviously open to a further discussion as we move forward. Again, thank you for having us, and looking forward to the time with the commission.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. As Bob said, I am Aubrey Johnson. I'm the Vice President of System and Resource Planning for MISO. I also have the responsibility of our Competitive Transmission Administration and our SEAM strategy. And joining me is Laura Rauch, our Executive Director of Transmission Planning. So as Bob indicated, she owns all the transmission planning in our shop. Scott Wright is our Director of Resource Planning. He has all the resource utilization, our interconnection queue, and resource adequacy portion of our business. We're going to move very quickly through some prepared slides to just share some information that were part of the conversation, the questions that you all framed for us. Really starting with this slide, which really gives you an overview of our MISO transmission expansion plan process. That's an 18-month process that begins in June of each year and concludes in December of the next year with our board's approval of the annual transmission expansion plan. And so throughout this, we have very many work streams that we work through with the stakeholder process to identify and vet the projects that ultimately become part of the MISO transmission expansion plan. This is meant to just give you an overview of some of the studies that take place throughout that process, and again, highlighting the number of meetings that actually take place to allow stakeholders to provide input, to work with our engineers and staff to vet the different projects, and ultimately these things lead to what we call our MISO transmission expansion plan. Currently, we're in the process of working towards approval. Just last week, the full MTEP 24 package was presented to our System Planning Committee, which is the governing committee that oversees the work that our team does. The package consists of approximately $30 billion of transmission projects. The run-of-the-mill, what we call our annual MTEP project, includes roughly 454 projects valued at $6.7 billion. It includes the 5 projects that are part of our joint targeted interconnection queue study, valued at $1.6 billion, and the 24 projects that are part of our LRTP Tranche 2.1, valued at $21.8 billion. Those make up that package that is under consideration by our System Planning Committee today. The next step in the overall approval process will be in a couple of weeks from now, when we will meet with the committee and review the substantive stakeholder feedback. So this is really a summary of all of the comments that were made by stakeholders about the package. The board committee also receives the detailed actual feedback, so they have the opportunity to see specifically what stakeholders said about the process, about the projects, and ultimately take up the motion to move forward with a recommendation for our board of directors. And finally, in December, at our December board meeting on Thursday, the closing of the meeting, assuming that it passes, that's when the package will be approved for those projects. Very briefly, we want to touch on our generator interconnection and really just talking about where we are and what are some of the things that are taking place right now. MISO has been doing reforms on our interconnection process for really the entirety of my time here, coming on 7 years. Most recently, we provided reforms that we increased some of the milestone payments and eliminated the penalty-free withdrawal, strengthening some of the site requirements to come forward. And so we did that with an expectation of trying to improve the quality of the projects that are being submitted to our interconnection queue and reducing the number of projects that were submitted to our interconnection queue. And so we've seen a reduction in that with our last queue cycle, but it is not sufficient based upon how we expect to move forward. And we're in a process now, we expect within the next 2 weeks to file with FERC a cap on our overall interconnection cycle process. And what that cap would do is limit each of the planning zones to 50% of the coincident peak in the number of megawatts that could be submitted in each particular cycle. We're doing this because in our current state, we actually have far more projects that show up than we're able to actually study. So in order to conduct our studies, you have to turn off all of the generation in particular regions in order to make the models work. That ultimately gives you bad network upgrades. They're more costly and lead to a lot of withdrawals and makes the process extremely long. Currently, it takes about 3 years for us to get through a current cycle because of the withdrawals and the restudies that are part of that. We believe with the increased reforms, the certainty around some of the increased milestone payments, the inability to have penalty-free withdrawal, reducing the size of our interconnection queue studies to roughly 68 gigawatts per cycle, that we will now be in a position to study projects faster. We're moving forward with technology improvements that we expect to be able to complete queue cycles within a calendar year. And these things will lead to faster cycles, more reputable studies, and lower overall network upgrades is what we expect to happen moving forward. There was a question really about the Missouri queue, and currently there are 62 projects, about 12.2 gigawatts of projects that are in Missouri that are part of the overall process. Currently, we have over 311 gigawatts in the overall MISO queue. And so for a point of reference, the MISO peak load, the peak load is roughly 126 gigawatts. So within our queue, we have over twice the amount of projects, the amount of gigawatts, than we actually have relative to load. So again, that really gives you an indication of what's not really viable in that regard. And finally, if we look at this now, there's also roughly 20 projects, about 4 gigawatts, that are under what we call the generator interconnection agreement in the state of Missouri. So that's a preview of what is available to begin construction if in fact there's a need for it here in the state of Missouri. So with that, I want to transition to my colleague, Laura, to work our way through having some discussions about our long-range transmission plan.
All right, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As Aubrey mentioned, my name is Laura Rauch, Executive Director of Transmission Planning. So I did want to spend some time today focusing on our long-range transmission planning process, our LRTP process. This is the process where, with a lot of help from our friends, our stakeholders, our states, we really spend some time to evaluate what the MISO system needs as a region, making sure that we're balancing that regional focus with local benefits as well. Our goal at the end of the day is to make sure that we're providing each locale value while making sure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So for Missouri in particular, this is meaning that the state has values, there's reliability and economic value there, while ensuring that it works together with the other states in the footprint. So holistically, we end up more reliable, more able to adapt to extreme weather, and really able to give our retail customers the best possible outcome. So this requires us to spend time for Tranche 2.1, which I'll walk through, is around 40,000 hours of MISO time, probably duplicated or triplicated with our stakeholders, to really evaluate the system from a multiple lenses, looking at what the future might be, developing models based on that, working through the issues and needs statements, and then coming to solutions. It is with credit to our engineers that we were able to really produce a portfolio that meets that high bar threshold on the reliability and economic value here. We see that this portfolio overall leaves the system in a much stronger way, able to react to resource fleet changes, able to react to these upcoming load shifts that we're seeing, and also has that localized benefits. So the Missouri piece of this really fits with previous transmission expansions, such as Tranche 1, which was approved a few years ago, and also ties into the existing infrastructure to make sure that we have that solid foundation for growth. Diving in a little bit, MISO is a regional transmission organization. We need to make sure that we are bringing that lens. But as everyone in this room is well aware, when you're talking about transmission, it's ultimately also a local question. We need to make sure, as we're talking to folks in Missouri or any other state, that you have that regional lens, but you also are providing benefits for the folks who will be paying for these transmission, who may see their lands needed for right-of-way, and optimizing that. So for LRTP, this involved analyzing over 90 different alternatives. And Missouri was one of those areas where we did see a change from where MISO initially proposed to where we ended up. Specifically, we started out and we had a 765 kV line through Missouri. As we looked at options and alternatives, working with our members and our stakeholders, we realized there was a 345 kV path, which has the significant reliability benefits here and also economic benefits as well, that provides many of the same needs. This is not saying that a 765 kV path is not useful. However, there was a step that we needed to take to make sure that we're strengthening the 345 kV system, and ultimately that was the best use of everyone's dollars and time. We did this throughout the footprint as well. The Tranche 2.1 portfolio ultimately looked at a number of different alternatives, as I said, over 90, analyzing them to getting to a solid system at the end of the day. Where we ended with the Tranche 2.1 portfolio is a strong reliability-based portfolio that provides benefits, and we certainly have those for each state. It's also critical to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture and making sure that the sum is greater than the parts. And this is captured in our LRTP business case, which goes and shows really some quantified economic values for the benefits here. Our goal here is not to have consensus on the benefits that we're providing. We know that people value different things in their world, but it's really to capture the multiple values that transmission can provide and provide that information to our stakeholders, to our states, as you're making decisions on moving these forward. Specific to Tranche 2.1, we did see that a large amount of this value is really on that reliability, making sure that our members have the tools and have the system to keep the lights on, and that they can deliver low-cost power to load. That's the local values that we documented, and we just brought those up to quantify on an economic value as well. We also needed to make sure that the benefits were being spread fairly, and so we did a look to make sure that every area within our state, within our footprint, including Zone 5, which is Missouri, has these benefits in excess of the cost we're asking for them. So for Missouri, we saw benefits of 1.3 to 2.4 times the cost. System-wide, this translates to about $5 per 1,000 kilowatt hours of cost, where you see $10 to $18 of benefits. As Aubrey mentioned, the next step in our process is going through board approval. And once the board approval occurs, we then start to talk about how these transmission lines are built, because the best solution is one that actually can be constructed. At MISO, we have a competitive developer selection process, which begins after board approval. We first start out by defining what is eligible for competitive developer selection, considering what might be upgraded and making sure that the incumbent transmission owners maintain control of their facilities, and using a competitive solicitation process to look through the rest. This process is not looking for least cost, it's really looking for the most valuable solutions. So as we ask for people to submit proposals on how they would build this transmission, we ask for them to describe how they would build it, how they would operate it, how they would restore it in emergencies, and yes, how they would, the costs of such service, including any cost containment that might be part of that. With that, that actually concludes our remarks today.
I think we're going to have some commission questions. Chair Hahn?
Good morning, Laura, Aubrey, Bob. Thank you so much for coming and presenting this material. As you can imagine, I do have questions. I think I'd asked before, but in comparison to SPP, their ITP does show actually a net dollar benefit to customers. This is a very large, expensive portfolio. Talk to me about the customer impact.
Thank you, Chair Hahn. And that is something that we take very seriously. We obviously have a shared obligation with MISO, with our utilities, with our states to make sure that is. We don't have exactly the same evaluation that SPP has. the $5 of benefits for $10 to $18 worth of costs is focusing on the transmission. Oh, thank you. $5 of costs and $10 to $18 of benefits. Thank you, Aubrey. Is really focusing on the transmission. There's a large portion of this which is generation costs rather than transmission. And so that is something that certainly is in play. We do believe transmission helps enable the benefits of that generation. And so we do see that these have benefits, but we don't have the more holistic rate impacts that SPP provided.
Okay. I'm just going to use some of the slides to talk through the rest. Slide 12 has the cost benefit chart, and a large portion of the benefits are mitigation of reliability issues. From my understanding, the market monitor has called into question the measurement of the metrics behind reliability issues and stating that the metrics that were used vastly overstate the benefits of the reliability to this portfolio. Talk to me about that.
So I do think it's probably worth anchoring this by saying we do fundamentally disagree with our independent market monitor on this issue. We have a different planning philosophy where our goal is to plan for our members' resource mix and not to impose our finger on the scale of what resources need to be built. So I will just preface this by that statement. Regarding the mitigation of reliability issues, it's important to say that no one is not, I haven't heard any stakeholder, even those that have concerns on this metric, saying that this portfolio does not provide significant reliability value. The question is on how we monetize that and how we show the value of that. And it's a very hard thing to talk about when you're talking about the ability to keep the lights on and people's livelihoods as a result. How we have chosen to value this is through going and looking at the avoided risk. So one of the things Dr. Patton has mentioned is we use the value of lost load, essentially the cost if you shed load as part of that valuation. He accurately points that we would not shed load in these situations, that we would find other ways to go and mitigate this risk, and we do agree with him. We actually did that in the calculation of this metric. So as we're trying to calculate the avoided risk, we're using redispatch to try to get around the system issues. We are looking at only the set that is really impacted by this portfolio, and we're using a range of value of lost load to capture that. At the end of the day, we do think that this is a strong value of this portfolio. It will help keep the lights on, and it will do so in a way that mitigates the risk to load, and this is what's captured here. So we will have additional discussions on this in our stakeholder forum. This is a hallmark of our substantive feedback that we'll be discussing with the board. We do not dispute Dr. Patton's statements that redispatch would not be avoided, would not be used, or that we would not shed load in these situations. That is not the purpose of valuation. We are comfortable that we are accurately capturing the risk here in a way that will sustain through state regulatory proceedings. Aubrey, please add.
So if I could also add, one of the things that we think about in this regard is part of what we've done is using load shed as a proxy to work towards the valuation of what this number is. And so again, as Laura's indicated, we're not saying and suggesting that load shed becomes the direct option. What we are saying is that we work with our operations team. We talked about and we did do specific redispatch, and we worked through all of that. And what you will see here is when we got to the point of where we would not redispatch more. And so the option would be for load shed. And then the other way to think about this is, were it not for the transmission that we're recommending in this particular case, load shed would be an earlier option because you would not have the options of moving the load around, the transmission that we're talking about enabling here provides an opportunity and option for those things to happen, for some of the redispatch to occur. And so part of this starts to represent what would happen if you didn't have this transmission.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. I think I ask it also because of the following slide on slide 13 shows the particular cost by zone, cost benefit by zone, and Missouri has one of the lower cost benefit ratios compared to other zones. And I know we're all aware of the Zone 5 capacity auction. And so when we're looking at the value of this portfolio and the cost to ratepayers for this particular portfolio, I do have some concerns that if the reliability metrics are overstated, the benefits to our state could be drastically reduced and cost ratepayers a significant amount of money. And so I'm just trying to balance that with what's being said. And I know this conversation is going to continue, but I'm trying to balance that out. The other part is that connecting MISO north and south has been an issue for a long time, well before I got here. And there's no projects in this portfolio addressing that concern. So kind of tell me your thought process around that. When might we look for something to better connect north and south? Just talk me through that.
So thank you for the question. So if you think about it today, what we have potentially is not a lack of transmission between the regions. We have a contractual limitation between the two regions. And so our focus today has really been about trying to maximize the way we use the existing contract today. That hadn't always been the case. And so we've been working with SPP, the joint parties, through some of our strategy discussions to really improve that coordination, improve that relationship, and ultimately build off of that to think about how we would expand potentially those contract opportunities. I don't know if you're aware, but we most recently filed for an emergency energy agreement with the TVA, which would allow us to buy and sell energy during emergency situations with that entity, with TVA, which previously we were not allowed to do via the tariff and via the TVA rules. That's a function of coordination with Ameren and being the balancing authority for Ameren, being able to leverage that to be able to do that. So what I would come back and say that the way that we see on the near-term horizon to address and create more opportunity for transfer between the regions is to look at exploring what our contractual limits are, because that may be a more efficient, more cost-effective, and really quicker remedy, if you will, as we think about understanding how best to use that pathway.
I'm going to key in on the word quicker. So the congestion in this area has been pervasive for a good amount of time. So when we're talking about how we can modify contracts accordingly, talk to me about timelines.
So I think one of the things that we have had over the period of time, and again, long before I started in the role that I have here, was really from a relationship perspective and from an execution perspective, not having confidence that really primarily MISO was responding rapidly enough when there were system concerns for our neighbors, our joint parties. I think the record has shown in the last couple of years that overall performance has improved. We recently also just had operators from SPP, TVA, and Southern Company in our Little Rock office for 2 separate trainings over 2 weeks in early October, where we were exploring and working on RDT procedures. And so what we've been doing is really kind of building confidence that the MISO tools have the capacity to resolve issues where they're binding on our neighbors' systems with our own redispatch, and that essentially cutting flows across the RDT is not necessarily the first option. So we think that that confidence level is building, and as we start working towards this year, 2025, that was when we'll start looking at and exploring that as an option with those parties. And again, now we're talking about changing contractual things, and there are a lot of people involved, so I don't necessarily think that this is a slow process, but it is on my agenda to introduce this and have discussions with those parties about this, start exploring this in 2025.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Are there other commissioner questions? Commissioner Coleman?
Thank you. I've got a couple. In terms of the project queue, is MISO reviewing any way to distinguish between projects from incumbent utilities and transcos that are likely to be built, and the speculative projects that are less certain of happening at all?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Coleman. You triggered something that I forgot to talk about as part of this discussion. So, one, we're open season for anyone who wants to put in a project. So we don't differentiate between a load serving entity and or developer. When our queue is always open, when we put the date in upon which the queue is closing, we accept all projects. However, we recognize that we have a clear and present resource adequacy need within the whole MISO region, especially when you start looking at some of the load growth that's occurring. And so in addition to the work that we're doing with the interconnection queue cap, we, on November 13th, we will introduce at the Planning Advisory Committee what we're calling an expedited resource adequacy study. We will have a specific workshop with that on November 18th as well too, and it is our intent to move forward with a filing with FERC by the end of February of 2025 to move forward with this. And what is this doing? What does it mean relative to the question that you have today? The way we're framing this is that our queue backlog, we expect it to take us 24 months to 30 months to clear up our queue backlog. We are investing in technology to get to a 1-year cycle. But to get to all of that, we think we're 3 years out. And so even if we start a new queue today, anybody else is probably 4+ years before that study gets to a full GIA. That's insufficient for where we are today and what our needs are. And so we will petition to have a bridge towards that future that we're envisioning, whereby a load serving entity can inform the commission and MISO of their need and intent to have generation online within 3 to 5 years, and to be considered as part of this expedited resource adequacy study. And our view is that the commission would acknowledge that they had received that inquiry, and we would then treat that much like we treat a expedited project request where there's a load that needs transmission to support it. We study it within our MTEP process. And so this process we're envisioning will treat those particular generation requests as individual requests, to study them, to identify what network upgrades that they would imagine or need, if you will, and provide them with the information that will be required to come to you and petition for a certificate of convenience and need. And we expect to have that study done in a time frame of 6 to 9 months. We're also meeting with our neighbors at SPP to consider some of the things, how we would do effective system studies to support that as well too, and also to potentially partner with them using the same process because of some of the resource adequacy concerns that they have. So we see this as a way for load serving entities to address what we see as the need today and those shortfalls while we continue to work on our interconnection queue and get that into a 1-year cycle. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. So also, how does MISO's planning process engage or work with the national interest transmission corridors that were announced by the Department of Energy last May?
So obviously we are aware of the study, and basically, quite frankly, we were not necessarily fully engaged. This was a study that was done outside of the MISO process. We're aware of the outcome and some of the lines that are actually there as well also. One of those lines we actually studied as part of the work we did on long-range transmission planning to ensure that it did not have a negative impact, or the portfolio did not have a negative impact on that project as well also. And so that's really how we've been engaged and involved with that, is really looking at the lines and how they impact the work that we're actually underway throughout our planning process.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Judge.
Commissioner Holzman, did you have any questions?
No questions at this time, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kolkmeyer?
Yes, thank you, Judge. My question is, with all these data centers being built everywhere, do you all get involved with that, or is that the local companies, or do you work hand in hand? What concerns me is the 3 to 5 years that you're talking it takes to build something. Data centers aren't going to wait that long.
So Commissioner, a couple of things. One is, part of this, we had the resource adequacy issue before the data centers came along. So that's just an accelerant in that regard.
Yes, that I totally agree.
And so part of the way we have met with master planners and in some cases hyperscalers to learn more about the business, the process, to be able to be more responsive in that regard. The way we typically are engaged is when our load-serving entities come to us to announce both either the load and or the generation need to support that. When it's a load concern and they have sufficient generation, they're often bringing to us an expedited project request to be able to support whatever that load is, to be able to deliver energy to where it is. So that's typically how we're involved in it, which is to assess what the transmission needs are to support that. And then also what we're talking about with this new process, it would be to figure out how kind of generation is needed and the network upgrades to support that generation. So we are not the primary. We respond to the feedback and the work and the requests we get from our load-serving entities.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mitchell, anything?
Thanks, Judge. Sure, just some general questions. I'm looking at slide 9. And see if I'm looking at this right, at one 345 kV project that is in Missouri, and another that's on the map, but it appears to be in tranche 1. Can you give me a rough idea what the value or cost of those two projects in Missouri might be?
You know, I apologize. I don't have that number in my mind. We will look that up and get back to you, likely even in this forum.
That's okay. That's okay. And
Oh, thank you.
of those two projects, would like to have some understanding of what is the build out time frame, or what do you envision as the build out timeline for those?
And Aubrey reminded me, in the appendix of the slides, we do actually have an estimate on that. So for tranche 2 for Missouri, it's about $872 million. We will look up the tranche 1 investment on that line and get that to you as well. We are working on sequencing of those. We anticipate that by and large, tranche 1 will go into service first, and then tranche 2.1 will follow. For tranche 2.1, we're seeing in service dates between 2030 and 2034. As this is 345, I would anticipate it's probably closer to the start of that timeline. Tranche 1, we're trying to get everything in service by 2030, and our members are making good progress towards that.
And specific to Missouri, what are the benefits to Missouri customers for those two projects?
So those benefits, there is a large job component to this. The construction of the lines, the generation along with that is captured in the appendix. How we justified this was based on the reliability and economic value. So these lines act within the larger MISO portfolio to really provide a strong 345 kV pathway through Missouri, connecting it to. And I think that's especially critical when you look at Missouri, because what we've seen is that as weather patterns change, that's where these lines really can become critical. So the ability to increase transfer into Missouri, to send Missouri generation outside of the state, those are the reliability benefits and economic benefits of that are captured on a couple slides here and in much more detail in our reports.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Judge.
Are there other commission questions, Chair Hahn?
Of course, I have one more. I forgot a question. If you go to slide 6, it's on the interconnection queue and the projects in the queue. and it highlights that there's over 3 gigawatts with GIAs in Missouri. Talk to me about the queue. Talk to me about the types of resources in the queue, and if there's any of those resources that have been constructed but are still waiting for interconnection.
So let me work backwards in this part here. If you think about the slide here, the 3.6 gigawatts, these are primarily all solar, wind, and hybrid resources. These have signed GIAs that they are not online. So that means that the generation interconnection agreement has been signed. All the network upgrades are known. I do not know off the top of my head if there's any construction actually underway in Missouri to support that. I can reach back out and provide that information back to the commission later in that regard. I will say broadly, when I look at our interconnection queue, the MISO interconnection queue has 57 gigawatts of signed generator interconnection agreements, and over half of those 26 gigawatts are substantially late. They've been substantially delayed insofar as meeting their commercial operations date. We see that for a number of reasons, whether it be supply chain, permitting, equipment. This is one of the reasons also when I talk about the ERA study, the Expedited Resource Adequacy Study process, we're asking and framing this where that load-serving entity needs to be making a commitment to have new generation online within 3 or 5 years, so that ultimately we're not in a waiting game, if you will, expecting the generation to be there when it's not. Because one of the challenges I think we see when we talk about resource adequacy today is the fact that so many resources have passed through the queue, but they're not coming online at the rate and need that we expect them to. So ultimately, if you look at our resource adequacy, and I'm giving you more than you asked for here, but if you look at our resource adequacy construct, I believe the numbers are we need to see roughly almost 3 gigawatts of resources coming online annually. And to date, for the year 2024, that number is tracking something along the lines of like 1.3, 1.4 gigawatts. So we are not moving at even to the low end need of what we need to continue to be reliable over the window that we see for the OMS MISO survey.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other commissioner questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I'm going to ask for staff and OPC and everyone else to kind of hold your questions for MISO. We're going to go ahead and get SPP on here and hear from them before we go to other questions. So is SPP available? There we go.
Yes, good morning. How are you all doing? We apologize for not being able to be there. The weather conditions just did not allow us to get there today, but look forward to being in person to our future meetings. Today we have with us Casey Cathy, who's our VP of Engineering, that will be presenting our slide deck, and as well as Ben Bright is on the call with us, and Angela Satari is also here with us. And so, Casey, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you if you're there.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Is Kim, just a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let me change this up a little bit. The hearing room is small. I'll move this to stage. Okay. That way I can see the slides y'all are looking at. Okay, yeah, good morning. As Kim mentioned, my name is Casey Cathy, Vice President of Engineering. We can get started. This slide deck has a lot of information, and I almost want to say I echo and MISO staff that basically ditto. A lot of the same challenges that you've probably heard, a very similar situation, just a different footprint. But we can go ahead and move forward. Might move through some of these slides quickly, but as you all did with MISO, we're open to any questions you might have. We do have a little bit of different information to start with the in-service date delay. We have over 240 projects yet to be built, and that was from past SPP integrated transmission plans, and we're tracking that. And so we'll go through that, a GI update, our 2024 ITP, And then we have a few slides on the competitive bid process. I think that's there's been some questions from Missouri staff on that as well. We can go to the next slide. One more. So as I mentioned, so 240 projects are currently out of with notice to constructs, and we're waiting to get built across SPP's footprint. About a quarter of those are delayed more than 1 year. And so from a corporate risk perspective, and a lot of the challenges that Aubrey and Laura mentioned, from SPP, it's very similar. You look at not just the load growth, but the resource challenges we have, the regional fuel mix changes that we've seen, an aging fleet for conventional resources, the build rate for wind and solar and electric storage resources has slowed a little bit the last year or two. We need more transmission and we need it fast. And so we're trying to stay ahead of this. And so we're putting in the spotlight and really making a 2025 corporate goal to make sure that we're ahead of this. And we've done everything we can do, at least from an RTO perspective, to make sure that transmission is getting built. It's not just analyzing the right transmission, but also after we've given it to the transmission owners, are they building it at the rate that they should? So we can go to the next slide. And so there is some work that's underway. We've clarified the difference between a need date and an in-service date, and we're refining our overall reporting, which has cleaned up a bit. You know, it's similar to resource adequacy, that once you're scarce in a product, then you can provide a lot more attention to it, and that's what we're seeing with the need for transmission. Is that, you know, we really need to clean up our reporting and track the money. Track the money and the investment, track the staging and the construction, and make sure that all of the TOs are doing what they need to do in a timely fashion. So more attention has been given since 2023, and we've revamped our process earlier this year. And so our metrics are becoming more and more refined as we move forward. But as I mentioned, a quarter of those are over a year, and we want to make sure that we're staying ahead of it. Can we go to the next slide? So some of the ongoing challenges, I think there's sort of a spectrum of how we go about as an RTO addressing in-service date delays. It's one thing to come up with these large portfolios. I heard Aubrey and Laura mention 32 billion for MISO, and we just received board approval for 7.7 billion for SPP. But we want to make sure that we're not just compiling to maybe an underlying problem. That once it's kind of out of the RTO's hands, are we doing everything we can to get it built? But on the screen here, we've done some deeper dives in terms of ROFR laws for states, looking at our competitive bid process, understanding that, you know, a lot of these projects are brownfield or are in ROFR states. And so we want to make sure that at least we're tackling the low-hanging fruit first before we if we need to go through probably a more contentious policy discussion, if that's necessary for delayed projects. At this point in time, though, we think that what we're doing right now and highlighting the problem and giving more quarterly reports on those incumbent or designated transmission owners that are building, a little bit more airtime to explain what's going on, and provide more up-to-date reporting, it is starting to work. And so just need to stay ahead of it. We can go to the next slide. Okay. Just really at a high level, the 2024 ITP has 89 projects, and our SPP board of directors asked about about 3 months ago that if this portfolio were to be approved, which it was, what would we predict would be immediately delayed based on the transmission owners and historical data that we actually have? And the good news is, based on the location of the transmission that's getting built out of this particular portfolio mapped to those TOs that are significantly delayed, it's a small amount that would be automatically delayed. So you can kind of see the breakdown in terms of low risk, medium risk, and high risk. So 200 million of the 7.68 billion would go to those designated transmission owners that have delayed projects, more than 3 delayed projects greater than 3 years. So just doing a high level assessment to see if we're adding to the problem. Let me go to the next slide. So that's it for the in-service date. We'll go straight to the GI. We are working through 7 concurrent clusters in our backlog clearing mitigation plan. We are actively working through that, and that is currently in green status. It's about maybe 1 month behind, but given it's a 3-year project, that's actually really good for us as a region, working through all of the backlogs going back to 2016 and working through those processes. We can go to the next slide. So the data I wanted to convey here is on the right side of the slide. Since January 2017, 41.6 gigawatts has been added to the system out of 243 new GIAs. We peak at 57 gigawatts, so roughly half of MISO's footprint. So if you did some comparisons, it's not exactly linear, but that's a decent look. I liked what Aubrey said in terms of what they've seen this year. SPP has seen a little bit of slowdown as well. We've actually had 1 gigawatt go commercial in our footprint, and historically that's been about 2,800 megawatts. So it's about a third. And here we are in November. We do have another 800 megawatts that are set to go commercial by the end of the year. It's just a couple of months away. So we'll see how that looks, but that's still, roughly 2/3 of the past few years. And so we have seen this trend of not just us getting through the GI backlog, but the actual commercial rate of these resources once they get the GIAs has slowed down as well. Very consistent with MISO's report. We have worked through the pink box is a good data point. In 2024, 97 more executed GIAs, resulting in an additional 17.1 gigawatts. So we currently are at 24 gigawatts that are out of SPP's hands. They are signed GIAs ready to be built. So that's good news for the resource adequacy. Hopefully most, if not all, that gets built. You go to the next slide. This is just a breakdown by cluster and generation type. And it is really the details I just mentioned. The 820 megawatts are commercial, and then we're waiting on what's on screen for the remaining to go commercial as well. We go to the next slide. And this is a breakdown of the commercial operations date. About a year ago, we put this online. It's a forecaster for what the GI customers tell us is their plans for in-service date. So it gives you a nice breakdown year over year. And it is updated at least twice a week. So it seems like every time we put together a presentation, you go out to the website, it's updated just a little bit. But there's a lot of good information on our website there. You can see the 82 in the center of the screen. You can see the 82.6 gigawatts. That's our total queue that's active. And then you can see the data point on the left, 23.5. It's a lot of wind. It's a lot of solar. It's a lot of batteries, what's called electric storage resources. They're all 4-hour lithium ion technology. And then you can see on the right side, just the breakdown of states. Let me go to the next slide. I think we have some Missouri specific in 1 or 2 slides. This is just another way of looking at the pie chart, what we see. We do have a little bit of thermal that has doubled in the last year, so that's good news from an optimal fuel mix perspective. And what we're actually seeing is the need for capacity critical hours in the winter. It went from 3,500 to 7 gigs now in the current queue. We can go to the next slide. Okay, this is a very busy slide, so I apologize for that. There are a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. SPP is actively pursuing what's called the consolidated planning process, which is a novel approach to generation interconnection, where we are blending our long-term transmission plan with generation interconnection. And that is a novel approach. It is going to take multiple years to get there. But once we stand it up, it'll be a 12-month process to where a GI request will be submitted. And if they qualify for all of the requirements, they will have an answer and GIA within 12 months, and it will be novel in the fact that it's a general contribution to the overall transmission build, such that the generators are paying their share, as well as the load is paying their share for the necessary transmission to build out, not just for the generation, but all of the optimal needs that we have in our current ITP cycle. All the blue lines are all of the 7 clusters that we're working through the backlog. Another soundbite is that this time next year, frankly, it'll be September of next year, we will be either through the generator interconnection agreements or actively in GIA negotiation for all of those clusters. So that's a very good milestone for us to hit and work through the existing backlog. We can go to the next slide. So that's it for, and now just a couple of, I think this is really good information for Missouri. So we can go to the next slide. We've been looking in the last year, let's say more data to ensure what is it we're actually looking at with the GI cluster and what would likely get built. There's a lot of notion out there around speculative GI requests, those that are kind of testing the waters, maybe GI requests that some are more viable than others. And what we've done is try to do a deeper dive on what it is actually it gets built and see if we can have better projections and usage for transmission build out. So there's a lot of data on here, but just highlight 2 things. The high percentage projects, which is on near the right side of the screen, that is based on a study that we worked with Lawrence Berkeley on to determine, generally what amount, just specifically looking at transmission upgrade costs, what is the amount that the GI requests see that would be commercially viable, and what is that threshold where it breaks their business case? In other words, 91% of all GI requests in SPP go forward if the price of the upgrades is less than $125,000 per megawatt. And so if it exceeds that number, the likelihood of it, for some reasons, whether it's a public need or required for a purchase power agreement, we've seen some projects go forward when it exceeds that cost for upgrade. But that is kind of the knee of the curve in terms of just what actually is commercially viable. So you can see just based on this dashboard that yes, we have 82 gigawatts in the queue, but based on the data we have, only 55 is actually going to move forward. We can go to the next slide. And so Missouri, so specific to Missouri, you have over 6 gigawatts that are currently in the queue. There is a little bit of a higher percentage that you could see from how many projects. The gen count number is the 19. You can see 24, based on that cost threshold, 2445 is commercially viable from our data alone. Granted, there's plenty of other reasons why a project may or may not go forward, but specifically looking at shared network upgrade costs, this is what we're seeing. So yes, there's over 6 gigs that's in Missouri, primarily solar. You can see the breakdown on the bottom right, solar and batteries. But 2,400 is based on our numbers would actually go forward. And I apologize. We did this for Oklahoma just 2 weeks ago. It says Oklahoma in the top right, but this is Missouri data, so we'll get that fixed. That was a miss. We can go to the next slide. Okay, I think we can keep going just for. We can one more slide. Let's see. Again, there was a lot of data here, and we probably could have cleaned it up for, I think we can just go straight to the ITP. This is just different data, and if you have questions on it, you can send me an email or we can talk about it now. Just different data and breakdown by transmission owner and project of that GI. Okay, we can go straight to the ITP, if you don't mind. Okay. I know Commissioner Hahn has seen some of this, but I don't think everyone else has. So I think we could probably spend a little bit of time on our largest portfolio. We did release the our generational challenge a few months ago. Very similar to the entire industry. Really, frankly, it's a global issue at this point that we don't have enough generation to meet the growing demands of the system. If you swap out our conventionals for renewables, the accreditation path is a little bit different. And then the need for transmission is there for a mesh network and reliability perspective. And then you couple that with what we're actually seeing with load growth, not just large data centers, but overall electrification, electric vehicles, and SPP's footprint. We have electrification of the oil and gas industry in the Permian Basin and the Bakken. We also have crypto mines that are connecting. We have a lot of hydrolyzer customers that are looking to connect. So the demands are far exceed our ability to build resources in a timely manner. And transmission is going to be key to unlocking the ability to meet reliability needs. And so we can go to the next slide. We have overlapping studies with ITP. This is just a quick update. We did just finish our 2024 ITP and have a few slides on that. But we always have roughly 2 to 3 ITPs running concurrently. 2025 will include the resiliency needs, which we are solidifying and moving forward, not just for FERC Order 1920, but also for the region itself. The region needs it. We can go to the next slide. So our 2024 ITP is over 2,000 miles of new transmission. It will include our first 765 kilovolt line for the region, and it is the start of a potential 765 backbone. So if you look at the last 10 to 15 years of SPP's build out, we've been building out a 345 kV backbone, and that has largely helped facilitate the low LMPs that our members enjoy and our states enjoy with the amount of, frankly, wind that we have in SPP's footprint. We're kind of known as the wind RTO. This particular portfolio will start the 765 backbone, starting in New Mexico and moving northeast from there. It's a $7.7 billion portfolio, but it's not only our most costly portfolio, but it's also our most beneficial. Historically, our BC ratios in our annual transmission plans have roughly been around 4 to 5 benefits to cost, and this one on the low end is 8 to 1. And just like anything else with a business case, you have to shake it. This is expensive. It costs ratepayers money. We need to make sure we're not just building the right transmission, but we're building in a timely manner. We've looked at low gas. What if the gas price stays low? What if wind doesn't come in as fast? What if solar gets stalled and doesn't come in as fast? And you can actually stack all of those what if scenarios in a tornado risk chart, and we would still exceed the BC ratios of our highest BC ratio in history of SPP's portfolio. So this is a very strong portfolio from a benefits to cost perspective. We can go to the next slide. This gives you a breakdown of just the updates. The elevator speech really of what's driving 7.7 billion is load growth. We have seen a massive amount of load growth change. Another data point is that our year 2 model for this portfolio exceeds last year's year 10 load. So in other words, this is all member driven. So what the members told us last year for 2023 ITP, 10 years from there, so 2033, that load number is exceeded by 26 in this portfolio. So that just gives you sort of it's daunting. It's a lot more load that's being added. We also have a number of winter weather projects, and that's where Missouri in particular is affected, where we are working. This is the first portfolio where we've issued notice to construct specifically for winter storms and resiliency. Okay, I'll speed up just a little bit. Go 2 more slides. This is a breakdown of the costs and benefits of the portfolio. So again, it's 7.7 billion. The way you read this slide is it's grouped by what the need is addressing, what the project is addressing. So at 3.1 billion addressing reliability needs and so on and so forth. On the bottom left is a good data point from out of the 89 projects, what projects are meeting what need. And then you can see that a number of projects are actually meeting, let's say 11 projects are meeting reliability needs and economic needs. So just different ways of looking at what this project's portfolio is actually solving for. We go to the next slide. This is a breakdown of the map and location of the projects. The coral snake looking, and that's probably not the greatest thing, but the red yellow hash is long 345 kV, and that's really what's driving the cost. Is the cost of everything, as we all know, is going up, but specifically the cost of transmission is going up, and so our 345 kV cost estimates have gone up significantly since we started this portfolio. And as you can see, there's a lot of 345 in the portfolio. So that's what's driving the costs of this portfolio. One other note is the purple, it's purple and yellow down in the Panhandle of Texas and New Mexico. That's the 765 kV facility, and that's primarily driving load and supporting voltage in that area. Another note are the snowflakes. So the snowflakes peppered around really the center of SPP's footprint. So you have a 345 on the west side, a 345 linking Nebraska and Kansas sort of in the middle east side. And then we've got 345 legs going into Missouri. And that's where I want to spend a little bit of time on. That addresses Winter Storm Elliott. The two previous projects, the two other snowflakes address Winter Storm Uri. If you can visualize, Uri was a gas supply issue. Texas obviously had a lot of challenges, but so did SPP. And it was mostly a southern failure of the gas pipeline infrastructure. Most resources didn't perform very well in that extreme condition, but it was sort of a north to south challenge from a transmission and prevailing flow perspective. Elliott in Missouri was more of a transmission problem. So it was more of a lack of transmission and voltage support in the area. And it did actually cause some load shed to Missouri customers. And so that's where that sort of rhombus trapezoid type of yellow area where it's highlighting the need for additional transmission. Okay, we can keep going. Two more slides. Yeah, this just gives you the data. So I think that Commissioner Hahn asked about this asked MISO this. From a rate perspective, we looked at various ways of quantifying the benefits to ultimate ratepayers. There's a lot of good information on this slide. I think at a really high level, the way to think about it, and this is something we probably need to be better at, specifically around the states and when rates are starting to go up. The way you visualize this is the blue is what dollar amount our marginal energy cost would be if we didn't build the portfolio. So you have the current 2023 average is the gold. So that's $27. If you don't approve the portfolio, the costs go up to 66. But then if you do approve the portfolio, it brings the cost back down to 25. So, and that's the green. So it's very important to kind of state it this way because transmission costs are going to go up. But that's only one side of the equation. You have to look at what the energy cost would be if you didn't build the transmission. And that's where our net rate impact is roughly $10 to $11 in net savings on our electric bill for 2033. One last thing is this is our first portfolio that has each state in SPP benefits to cost ratio greater than 1. And that is mostly driven because load in general is going up everywhere and transmission is being built pretty much everywhere in the footprint as well. Cycle by cycle, historically, there's been transmission built maybe in the north and not the south, or the west and not the east. And that has led to certain states having a lower than 1.0 BC ratio cycle by cycle. Okay, we can keep going. So not everything's easy, and with this type of portfolio, there is one remaining issue, and we do have a few, and it does affect Missouri to an extent. One of the projects out of the 3 legs leading into really from Kansas down to Oklahoma and then over to Missouri, one of the 345 legs, we have a disagreement with staff and members, and so the board deferred the staging of the project for a few months while the members kind of vet what staff has done. And I don't know that I have time or that you all need to know all the details there, but ultimately these projects are recommended for approval. But I think that the net outcome of what the board will do in December for specifically the Buffalo Flats to Delaware line, the middle line, may make that project competitive. But at the end of the day, project is intended to get built regardless of this issue. We can go to the next slide. Okay, I think I can skip that one. We can go to Missouri ITP projects. One more slide. This is just a breakdown of all the ITP projects on a single slide. So if you have any questions on that, as you can see, all of those are addressing winter weather. One project in particular also addresses persistent operational needs. And then there's one more slide on ITP projects. We do have a few economic projects. We are working with ACI, Associated Electric, to determine whether or not there's some cost sharing. It's on the next slide, sorry. Yeah. There's some ACI potential projects that we may be able to work with them on for cost sharing purposes. Okay, the final topic I have very briefly is competitive upgrade determination. We do have, this just breaks down the governing language in our tariff and business practice on how that works. Each region is slightly different on how they have met the FERC Order 1000 competitive process. As I mentioned, there is one particular project that might affect Missouri just in terms of that first leg leaving Kansas and then terminating in northeast Oklahoma, which does provide some much needed transfers into the Missouri area, as well as voltage support for reliability purposes. We can go to the next slide. This is a really good slide, regulatory put together on all the different determinations. Specifically, the bottom middle is not short-term reliability projects. So how SPP determines that is within what's called a 3-year short-term reliability window. And so if the need of the system is solved by a particular project within that 3-year window, then it would not be competitive. There's a various others on the slide that sort of quantify all the criteria and qualifying criteria that would deem a project competitive, which goes to that pecking order as we speak, since the portfolio was approved last week. We can go one more slide. Okay, final slide. For ITP, the 2024 project determination of what would be competitive, there is at least two. One is in New Mexico, and one is leaving Texas and sinking in the panhandle of Oklahoma. That's also an economic project, so there's at least two. And then, as I mentioned, there are two that are being discussed in terms of staging, and those could possibly also be competitive. One would potentially affect Missouri if it went competitive. And that's it. That's all I have for the slides. So I'm open for any questions y'all have.
Thank you for that. Chair Hahn, questions?
Thank you, Casey. I really appreciate that. I know it's a marathon for you every time you do these presentations, so thank you. My questions are going to just kind of follow board questions around the Buffalo Flats to Delaware line, because I think it is the one that most directly impacts us at this point in time. I kept hearing in the board meeting that staff's recommendation was that the line is needed by 2028, and that your models show that it's needed by 2028. When you say the line is needed by 2028, if the line has not been constructed by 2028, what happens in your model?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You're saying if it doesn't, it's like, this is a difference between the interpretation of in-service date versus need by date. And so this, what you're highlighting is a potential gap. And so what traditionally happens is that we just go by the need date, even if it's not reality. In other words, if the need by date is in 2 years time frame, but it takes 4 years to build, we still put the need by date based on when we actually need it for the particular models. Your question is kind of the opposite. So if we are recommending a year 5, which would be 2028, and it doesn't go in service by 2028, since it is needed for load shedding purposes, we would actually have to develop some sort of operating guide or reliability mitigation. And that's not unheard of. We actually have to do that for all of our reliability needs for upgrades that are delayed.
Okay, so if it's not constructed by 2028 and the need by date is 2028 and it's competitively bid, so assume that it's not, how do we explain to me how it would work in practice? Do you move up the notice to construct, or how does, I'm not, it's not computing for me.
Yeah, okay, so I think there's, and I apologize, I might be reading into your question. I think there might be two questions in your comments. One is whether the competitive bid process actually pulls in, does it make anything faster, right? And I think we've heard that a few times. And historically, the answer is maybe. And so the competitive bid process does add time on the front end. That is 100% true. You have to go through the request for proposal. We have to stand up our industry expert panel. They have very specific and legal and regulatory rules associated with what they need to do to select the incumbent TO. And so that takes roughly 18 months. And so it does put a delay, I guess, on the front end. But what we've actually seen with some of our competitive projects is those that get the project are more incentivized to build as fast as possible. And usually, and I don't want to presume, but the ones that I'm aware of, they don't have a conglomerate of other projects they're dealing with based on their particular footprint. And so they pull in on the back end their construction dates. That's a long-winded way of saying that it doesn't necessarily add time to the in-service date if it goes through the competitive process. The second piece of your question, I believe, is more related to that need date. And yes, this is related to protecting and preserving load in the Southwest Missouri region. And so what we've done with this staging is that we've staged the project out really from east to west. So I mentioned 3 legs. You have the North Branson to Monette leg, and then you have the Delaware to Monette leg, and then you have Buffalo Flats to Delaware leg. As you build out those 345 legs from the Branson area, those first 2 legs, we're recommending a need by date in year 2. And so that is actually or date of issuance, so it's immediate. And so if those go in service faster, then that mitigates the time frame between now and year 5. The third leg is required for year 5, primarily because of load growth and resource changes in that area. So if that happens, where the third leg is delayed, we would definitely have to build some sort of mitigation plan, and that could be inclusive of load shed.
Yeah, thank you, Casey, for the explanation, because I think with the year 5 staging and with the disagreement between all of the groups, just summarize it there, all of the groups, my most serious concern is it's not constructed in 2028 and we have a load shed event. And so what are we doing on the front end to mitigate that? So I think that's probably a lot of the concerns from the stakeholders too, and potentially from the board, but I just wanted to say it here so that it's known. But thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
Are there other commission questions? And Commissioner Coleman didn't have any. Commissioner Holzman?
Yes, just briefly. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that there's a generation problem, nationwide, and you talked about renewables being perhaps a part of that, but that their capacity factor, and we know the intermittency and what they're accredited for the resources is lagging. What do you see as storage being a part of this? I mean, storage can be built along transmission lines to bolster the capacity of renewables. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in a timeline for when something like that might firm up the renewable into base load?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So batteries have their place, and we are very excited for maybe the first 4 or 5 gigawatts of electric storage resources in SPP. We are accrediting, it's actually in front of FERC right now, electric storage resources and battery technology by way of effective load carrying capability. So effectively, think about it this way: if the load shape of SPP is a sine curve, which it's not always, but for the summer and typical shoulder months it is, batteries are not a power source. But to your point, they really help bolster, excess wind at night, and then when everybody wakes up and turns on their coffee pots and gets ready for work in the morning, load's starting to rise, but the wind tanks because the sun's out and it typically warms the ground, and there's all sorts of technology and forecasts around our wind starts slowing down when we actually need it most. And so solar will help, but batteries can kind of help shift that. And so, yes, we are actively working to not only provide enough information to load responsible entities to make the business case necessary to get this stuff built, but also encourage from a GI perspective surplus generation, which is a interconnection service that would allow us to better interconnect batteries behind, or not necessarily behind the meter, but behind the point of interconnection for wind and solar in an effective manner. And we would accredit them as the sum of the parts. So it would complement that wind without necessarily having to upgrade the transmission system. And that is actually in place today. But we're trying to work with our utilities to say, why aren't you using this more effectively? Where are the barriers? At the end of the day, the RTO, we just don't want to be the barrier. We want to make sure we're removing as many barriers as possible to allow that business case to work if it does.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Coleman, or I keep calling you Commissioner Kolkmeyer.
No questions.
Commissioner Mitchell?
None for me, thanks, Judge.
Thank you. Did you get all of your questions? Do you want to ask that now? Commissioner, or Chair Hahn?
Last question, but it's for both of SPP and MISO. Most recently at SPP's board meeting, we were given a presentation about planning processes that are occurring individually, SPP planning with MISO, SPP planning with AECI. I want to, and I'm just going to keep asking, where are we in the three-party talks for planning purposes? And are there any known inhibitions to or prohibitions to engaging in those planning processes differently than you have before?
Okay, so you want me to take a cut first?
Yeah, go ahead, Aubrey.
Okay, so just kind of working, Chair Hahn, MISO met with AECI approximately 2 weeks ago, and have committed to meeting with them at least biannually to discuss needs and issues with them and other opportunities along those lines. We are also very much interested in supporting and learning more about some work that's already taken place with SPP as well too. So I think our approach to this is to again engage both parties as we've talked about and do that. So if you're talking about a coordinated study, if you will, between all three entities, we don't have that on the agenda for 2025. We are planning on working with SPP on an interregional study, and I am certain that to a certain extent there'll be elements of engaging AECI in that process as well also.
I started asking about this a while back, and to SPP's response, SPP had said we'd really like to work on something in 2025, and then I'm here and then I hear you say we have nothing planned and we don't plan to do that. So I want to say that does give me a level of pause, because we're going to continue to get the same results we've always gotten, which is a not coordinated plan that does not benefit, the cost and benefits are not appropriately allocated, and we're not doing anything to change our, how we always do business. And so I just want to say again, I really want the RTOs to work on a three-party talk, a three-party study process, and if possible, try to make it a priority in 2025 as had been previously indicated. So I'm just gonna And I heard there could be legal impediments to which I am unaware. And maybe that's something you're, not at privy to say. So I would just ask that you further explore that. Thank you.
Are there any other commission questions? Okay. Does staff have questions? Mr. McKinney?
Thanks. Adam McKinney with the Missouri Commission. For SPP, real quick, MISO talked about placing a limit on the number of participants in the GI study in terms of the Q, like a Q cap. Is that something SPP is considering?
Not at this time, Adam. We are working, and Aubrey mentioned, what MISO's doing from an expedited resource adequacy perspective. SPP would like to be part of that, and we'll be working with the REAL and with the RSC in the coming months on a version of that aspect of it. But in terms of a Q cap, we're not contemplating a Q cap. I think if you play that 82 gigawatts out and what we're doing with the backlog clearing, even if we introduce the expedited RA service in preparation or earlier than when consolidated planning process goes production, we don't see the need for a cap for our particular footprint.
Okay, I appreciate that. For MISO, you all talked about how you were working with SPP and the joint parties on north-south transfer gaps, and I know everybody is using the transmission grid and operations in a manner where, they look for the available capacity and whatnot. Would looking at the available capacity in a three-way joint study be easier than doing these individual two-party talks?
This is a fair question. I would say that's part of kind of the old question. If you got a problem and you can't solve it, make it bigger. So there's a piece of that that's part of that question. I'd say right now, we're trying to learn some of the methodologies and concerns that AECI has. And in the work that we're also talking about with SPP, to borrow your phrase, Chair Hahn, our studies in the past have not produced real opportunities in that regard. And so what we have committed to and what we're looking at now is we're in the process of looking at doing a waiver on our CSP and then going back and reviewing, rethinking how we're doing those study efforts to see if there's a better way to do that, to see if there are more projects, really looking at some of the things we've considered potentially with the study we're doing with PJM. So to come back and answer your question directly, at this point in time, I don't believe that trying to do a three-part study is going to advance us that fast in that regard. We are aware of and have the ability to interface with AECI, and we're working on building that relationship and looking at how we would plan with them and coordinate with them in that process.
When I look at the Missouri RTO map, and I didn't bring my sweatshirt that has the Missouri RTO map on it, I see AECI between SPP and MISO. So if I'm transferring energy back and forth between SPP and MISO, isn't it going through AECI a lot of the time?
So I don't have that map or those flows.
Or that sweatshirt, I understand.
Committed to memory, but again, we have engaged. We met with AECI a couple of weeks ago, understanding the importance of this. We've committed to meet with them a couple times a year to work on common issues, identify what those common issues are. And to your point, there's not a way really for us to engage with them to a certain extent without engaging with our partners at SPP as well also. And so whether or not those things happen in a three-party way, we're not ready to do that today, but I will say that I think that the way we're approaching it gives us the opportunity to have that coordination and have that engagement with both parties.
Okay, and go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add what Aubrey said, just from an SPP perspective. We're in the same boat, and really to Commissioner Hahn's question and thought, we have, it was just a couple of weeks ago, we have met with ACI. As I mentioned in my update, there are some potential projects we could do cost sharing with. If you look at what ACI is planning on building, they're building a 345 kind of right in the middle across the west to east across Missouri. You look at LRTP Tranche 2 and what Laura reviewed in northeast of Missouri, and then you look at what SPP has kind of helped facilitate more in the southwest. There are opportunities for maybe optimal cost share and optimal transmission planning aspects, but it's not like there is a lot of lost optimization today. We are working with Associated to sort of move forward with economic planning. Currently, Associated does not do economic planning, so they don't have adjusted production cost savings in their software and benefits metrics for transmission planning. So that's another barrier. But just to kind of clarify, we're certainly open to really what Aubrey said. So, moving forward, working towards more optimal cost sharing, but also optimal planning as well.
Okay, last question on 2025 CSP. SPP ACI produced third-party Tier 1 benefit information for the projects that were analyzed in the SPP ACI study. But they were hesitant to commit to doing that in the SPP MISO study because they wanted to talk to MISO. Since you're in the room, in the SPP MISO study, if you are turning the crank and producing Tier 1 Eastern Interconnect benefits anyway, would you be willing to produce the Tier 1 benefit information within your waiver asked for 2025 energy transfer study? That goes to both parties, I guess.
So I'd have to phone a friend. I don't have a relationship with the Tier 1 study. I will say this, the work that we envision taking place with SPP, we have similar ways we look at and approach projects from an economic and reliability basis. Again, the relationship and engagement between MISO and SPP has grown leaps and bounds over the last 4+ years. We were just together earlier this week, having discussions about the expedited resource adequacy study that we're contemplating. And so the best way I can answer your question is that when we do this work in 2025, it will be out in the public. We will share the results. And if there are projects that we identify, which that is part of what we intend to try to do, we will move those projects forward to get them in place.
I didn't hear you were going to share that information, so you're probably going to get asked about it again.
Yeah, Adam, this is Laura. I think we do need to follow up on that. I would like to have another discussion on what you're hoping to get there. I think we've worked together long enough to know that more information is not always better, especially as Chair Hahn said, if there's a need to move urgently, then sometimes there is a value in keeping it simple. So I will give you a call after this and let's chat about it.
Okay. The last question I would ask is, you all are putting forth a waiver, MISO and SPP, to look at the transfer study. What's stopping a waiver to look at MISO North, MISO South transfer study on top of the other issues? I know there are other things going on, and I know you have other systems in place, but to the extent that might involve seams,
Yeah.
I will tell you, it takes 3 times as long to do anything on seams to get a third of the benefit. I used to say half, but it's gotten upgraded.
Well, and I think you just answered the question, right? So it's not just MISO and SPP, they're the other joint parties. And I think, again, I believe that ultimately, as we continue to improve the way that we operate and use the existing infrastructure today, that opens the opportunity to adjust the agreement to increase that throughput today. That's a faster route, that's a cheaper route, and that would be something that we're focused on having discussions at this year. And so at some point in time, it becomes a resource limitation in your ability to conduct those studies. And that now becomes not just MISO and SPP, but Southern Company, LG&E, KU, and there are other ways we think right now that potentially there could be some addressment to that.
So if I want to look at projects in the Boot Heel of Missouri, possibly connecting to MISO South, what's my best strategy?
So let's make sure that, and I know this is not what you're saying, Adam, but I want to make sure we're not jumping forward to saying projects rather than needs. We want to make sure, and Aubrey framed this up well, to start with the needs definition and start with the biggest bang for the buck. There is absolutely operational comments that are ongoing. There's also the contractual limit and the ties between the system. I am very comfortable, and Casey and I were chatting about this last week, that we have good partnerships on talking through the transmission solutions for this area, and a lot of this can be done interregionally. My hesitation is similar to Aubrey's on some of the projects on if you can't solve a problem, making it bigger. There's also some value in making sure that we're keeping it small, keeping it simple, and being able to be agile. So this is probably just something that we need to continue to have these discussions on and discuss what are the needs we're trying to do. I'm hearing congestion. I suspect there's a lot of reliability in weather. So we'll want to keep having those conversations and let those needs drive where we might need to go, and then figure out the way to get that impact as quickly as possible, operationally and from a planning perspective, because they do have to work together.
So, Rich Germinder with the Missouri Commission. I just wanted to add on the question of coordination between SPP and MISO and AECI and our other load-serving entities in Missouri. If there's anything that the commission or commission staff can do to help facilitate those conversations and coordination, or if you run into any barriers and you're needing assistance with trying to work through that, whether it's just from a relationship perspective or a legal perspective, we want to make sure that you guys know that we're available and willing to join in the fight to get a better coordinated system plan for Missouri.
Are there any other staff questions? Is there anyone present for Office of Public Counsel that would like to ask questions? Are there any other utilities that would like to ask questions? Okay, I'm seeing some hands here, and I'll just start in the front. If you could come to the podium, I'd appreciate it, or that's fine.
Denise Buffington with Evergy Companies. We participate in SPP. Casey, are there any projects that you're aware of in Missouri that are delayed? Transmission projects?
No.
So I guess I'm curious as to the context of why you thought it was appropriate to have that discussion here. I think that the problem is not within Missouri, and I think that from a Missouri customer perspective, if there's something in the southwest corner of the footprint that's being delayed, it's actually probably a benefit to our customers to not have to pay for it now. I think that, and the whole framing of the transmission delays is far more complicated than what you presented. It's my understanding that the notices to construct from SPP come from multiple angles, whether it's a generation interconnection study, whether it's an aggregate study, which is for transmission service, whether it's from the long-term transmission planning study, or whether it's from the AQ process. There's lots of different angles from the delays, and I'm curious if you, I guess I'm curious what your baseline is for determining whether or not there's a delay.
Yes, I appreciate that, Denise. So, as I mentioned, the updated metrics that we worked on earlier this year and we started this year is really rebaselining what is realistic for in-service states. So that sort of cleans up the data. And I think at this point, the reason why I was in the deck is because that's what we provided in our quarterly joint stakeholder briefing, and it's been mentioned multiple times that we need to provide, continuous highlight on this to make sure that we're ahead of it and make sure it's not systemic, and it maybe is just more isolated. And I think that's our overall conclusion. So, yeah, I appreciate you bringing this up because it's not specific to Missouri. It's just really a challenge that we need to stay ahead of and make sure that as MISO's tranche gets built and SPP's additional transmission gets built, that we stay ahead of it. But yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say there.
So are you aware of any competitive projects that have been delayed?
Yes, two competitive projects have been delayed. Ben is on the phone. He might know the delay itself. I think one was only 1 month. But yes, competitive projects are not immune to the challenges of build.
So I would just add, stay tuned for more information on the transmission delays. There's going to be some stakeholder process on trying to add some specificity to this and some oversight to looking at it, but it's a far more complicated issue than what's portrayed in the deck. And I think the implication was that ROFR states generally have better luck. That's not necessarily true. The devil is in the detail on a lot of those issues. The other thing I wanted to say is on slide 28 of SPP's deck, they go over the benefits of the various projects. And I think, I'm curious, Casey, are the benefits isolated to either reliability or economic or policy, or is it true that most of them are multi-valued?
A lot of them are multi-valued, yes.
So again, I feel like the information that's been presented doesn't give the whole picture of what those projects are. The other thing I would say is that we are very concerned about the Buffalo Flats Delaware line. Load shed is not a mitigation. It is not a planning tool. Those lines are needed now. And there is still a lot of ongoing discussion and debate about the Elliott models that were only presented to the board. They have not been vetted by the technical working groups yet, so there is still a process in place to go over those and determine whether or not that is an appropriate need by date. We're so hopeful that SPP comes to the realization that those projects are needed now, and hopefully that we'll get them in service before Missouri has to experience load shed. Thank you.
Mr. Healy, did you have comments or questions?
Just a couple, Judge. Doug Healy, Missouri Public Utility Alliance. I'll start with MISO. Thank you very much for being here. And you have to excuse me, I was wandering around in the woods in South Dakota and got a head cold this weekend. Chairman Hahn asked a couple of really good questions about the IMM analysis. And I just want to bring it up, don't want to beat a dead horse here, but just a little bit further elaboration. I think Dr. Patton's point was, or at least his assertion was, hey, if you build generation resources on the eastern side of MISO, wouldn't that provide better cost savings for customers versus building the resources on the western side of MISO and then building transmission back out? And maybe I phrased that a little bit too generally, but that specific question, would you mind addressing that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I can start out. Aubrey is my +1 here. It's a little bit of maybe a false narrative. So obviously in MISO, MISO is not the resource planner. We work very carefully with our members. We did have significant discussions with Dr. Patton on how you project what that generation mix is going to be 20 to 40 years out. And what we do at MISO is we start with our member plans and we expand upon it from there. We did that and we tested 2 cases for Tranche 2.1. We had a future 2A, which was more what we think load growth is going to be, and then we tested it against a conservative future 1A, which is a lower load growth, and the resources in that mix are about 93% given us directly by our members. So even 20 years out, they're really thinking and figuring that out. The premise that this is all about transferring power from remote to load centers is not accurate. If you look at the maps of where the generation is located, whether it's our member plans or expansions, it is spread throughout the footprint. I am not confident that we could actually go and move generation as prescribed because I think we would start running out of land. We also had a different method that we used when we looked at members' goals and calculated them, meaning that we think that there needs to be more expansion than Dr. Patton says. So this is the key of that difference in planning philosophy that I mentioned earlier. We strongly believe our members are looking at a multitude of factors when they build their member plans. Markets are one of those. State requirements, reliability, all of these things go in. And so trying to change what our members have spent substantial time to say we could theoretically optimize transmission is not how we plan the system, nor is it how most of the transmission system is planned across the United States from our viewpoint.
And I just add also, part of that process also when we went through this was to take the specific feedback from our members, which resulted in over 500 changes to our siting plans that went along with that also. That also, in all reality, also creates a little bit of a false narrative, as Laura said, which is to say that if not the transmission was not built, then you just do these things over here. There's no evidence there. There's no discussion there. What we did from an expansion, really doubling down on that, Future 1A represented, I believe, 93% of our members' plans relative to what they generation that they plan on building. And so ultimately, when we think about the expansion for Future 2A, that takes to a load growth that's actually less than what we're actually experiencing today. So fundamentally, you're going to have a different need, and you're going to have increased generation need with the sustained load growth that we're seeing today. And so as we've stated throughout all of our public process, we disagree with the methodology that he's bringing forward and putting it as an option.
I appreciate those answers. I think that hits the nail on the head, though. Would you agree that, and I think you said further accurately, you're basing this on your members' planned generation, correct, where they're putting things? Do you think Dr. Patton has a point, though, that maybe, and this is beyond your pay level and mine, I'll just say that, if those members had looked at their generation differently, there could be less cost for the rest of us in MISO?
So our goal is to build a transmission plan that enables what's there, but also doesn't require it to be there. The joy of planning 20 years out is that's the dynamic you have to play with, is you know you are not going to be right. Certainly, if things change, our members' plan, but that is actually how our members' plans will change. But that's actually why we have a 7-step process rather than a 2-step process for LRTP. So I will not comment on the cost of the generation themselves. I can comment on the transmission. But we've built this so that you have a lot of flexibility on building this transmission, that load and generation locations, types do not matter as much. And what we've seen is that we've done this before in 2011 with our multi-value projects. When the lines were constructed and built, they actually provided more value. And that's a lot of it gets into trying to figure out what the next URI is and the value on that. So I won't comment on the cost of generation, but I will say for a transmission perspective, we are confident that these will have value even as members' plan shifts, because we focused on essentially building highways. We didn't focus on local roads that really depend on those specific load and generation locations.
So following up on that, and if you cannot comment on this question because of some pending litigation, that's fine, I'll give you an out. But I got to ask, Greenbelt Express, that was not included in the initial analysis of the LRTP, correct?
Correct. When Greenbelt Express was working through our process, our firm policy is for things like merchant HVDC, we want to make sure that they've concluded their study process, determine what upgrades are necessary, so that we can separate the costs that are but for the project and include that. For Greenbelt Express, they concluded and signed their transmission construction agreement in February of this year. That was after we had constructed our study models, and it was actually after we had produced our first set of results. So while we didn't include it in those studies, models, we did some evaluation to make sure that there was no duplication, there were no modifications, additions, deletions required if Greenbelt Express was included. And as we did those tests, there was no overlap between Greenbelt when it was included and the LRTP needs.
And I think it's fair to say if it's built, that's going to be a 2,500 megawatt generator in Zone 5, external generator. It's going to be pretty valuable to Missouri. Going forward, I know there's some settlement talks under GG and some of the things being changed to address this. Is that generator basically going to be at least considered a realistic possibility and modeling going forward?
Now that they've signed their transmission construction agreements, it is being included in all MISO-based models. It was simply a timing and ensuring that we don't build transmission and charge it to our load when the costs are because of other projects. And if we had included it in our base models without the transmission, that will happen.
One more question on the LRTP, and I'll let SPP have their turn. Do you guys anticipate additional deliverability of capacity into Missouri? I know you do with the LRTP. Can you get some, to the commission, can you get some indications of what that increase is likely to be?
Yes, so as we looked, and one of our metrics in the business case actually looks at increased transfer capability as you talk about adjusting generation. We do see increased transfer into and through Missouri. We don't have the seasonal looks at that. We will be working on that. But it is very fair to say that this will increase Missouri's import and export limit. That will factor into the capacity needs of the state as well.
Okay, that's all I have for MISO. Got a few questions for SPP, unless there's follow-up.
Go ahead.
Okay, SPP, want to talk about your slides on Elliott and Uri, which I found very fascinating. Ms. Buffington made a good point a minute ago. We're very concerned too about those projects in southwest Missouri, but my question might be slightly different. There is a general question, I think y'all alluded to it, as to whether the tariff is being followed and how those projects are being assigned, whether they're winter reliability or competitive. There is a little bit of concern on our end if they're assigned incorrectly about legal delays, as well as cost impacts. I think we'd all agree that just because something is assigned doesn't mean it comes in under budget or on time either. You've got the same issues as whether it's assigned or whether it's competitive. Can you comment, at least as much as you feel comfortable commenting, on where the board is at on making that decision? I know there's a meeting in December and some of the internal analysis.
Yes, so it sounds like you're up to speed, but for the rest of the audience, we do have two in question, one from the Uri models and one from the Elliott models, this Buffalo Flats to Delaware 345 line. The current direction and approval from the board was a further evaluation no later than the December board. And so that pretty much gives us 4 or 5 weeks to review. As Denise mentioned, the technical groups, primarily our transmission working group, that is really made up of the technical experts across the footprint that help the planning group in SPP facilitate the integrated transmission planning process. SPP created a year 2 model that was not created for the Elliott-based needs until September. And so they pretty much had less than a month to review what SPP did from a staging perspective. And so the current path is for the TWG and the Economic Studies Working Group to vet that model and look at what SPP has done. Also review the legal implications and what is and what is not allowed with our governing documents, which SPP has compiled in a more effective manner, so that we can come to an agreement prior to the December board. As far as speculation, I can't say, nor probably wouldn't want to speculate, but the board does have some discretion around the short-term reliability window and where the needs are versus competitive projects. I think given the legal implications, the challenge I think we have is that our current governing documents do not contemplate winter weather projects. The scope does, but the manual does not, and the tariff references the manual. And so that's where staff is we're leveraging the existing staging process for reliability purposes. Just so everyone knows, we are actively working with our members to fix this going forward, 2025 ITP and really beyond with FERC Order 1920. We need to add this resiliency staging into our ITP manual. So we need to get over the hurdle with this particular issue, but moving forward, we need to have prospective policy change, and we do intend on doing that first quarter, maybe second quarter of next year, so that we don't have to deal with this for the next portfolio next October.
And thank you. I mean, I think that's one of our general concerns as we look at how quickly can we put these projects in service. Legal delays would be unfortunate if that was the result. One final question. Western RTO, Markets Plus, I mean, I think these are great developments, but can you just give a general description of high level what they are for this group and how they're going to benefit Missouri?
Yes, so RTO expansion is on schedule for April of 2026. And so that is full expansion of all SPP business functions under full membership, inclusive of transmission planning, our overall integrated market. It does encompass 3 HVDC back-to-back ties with Western Interconnection. And so there are market benefits and transfer benefits, but in the long term, there's longer benefits as far as where we actually build out the system. We will be the first RTO to span multiple interconnects at that point. The RTO expansion is 6,500 megawatts, so it's roughly a 12% increase in our overall load. So there is some tangible benefits in terms of just the overall rate, the admin as well, admin fee for utilities within SPP in Missouri, on top of market optimization for lower LMPs. So that's the full implementation. Markets Plus is a separate contract-based service that SPP is going to provide. We're looking for full commitment in next month in December, and that'll mark a milestone once we get a critical mass of the potential 65 gigawatts of participants in the Western Interconnection under this Markets Plus contract. Effectively, what Markets Plus is a full-blown market with day 2 market financial market clearing with unit commitment, optimization in real time, congestion rights. There's a number of different activities. What it doesn't include is transmission planning, which if you've looked at the Western Interconnection, they need transmission as well. But this is contract service, which does offset some amount of the admin fee, but in the long term, it's a strategic move to ultimately get additional load and additional centralized benefits from economies of scale. So Missouri ratepayers would pay less for SPP, but in the long term, we would also benefit from additional resource mix and clearing across multiple ties, and maybe even joining the interconnects at some point.
Finally, I'd like to thank both SPP and MISO for your focus on the generation interconnect queue. As you all know, that's pretty critical right now as we have some capacity issues. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Are there any other stakeholder questions? Not hearing anything. Are there any other commission questions? Would the commissioners have any closing remarks, Chair Hahn?
Thank you all so much for coming and presenting to us. I know that, travel from Indiana is not convenient. And so I know you all already have busy travel schedules, and you already put together these presentations for your boards, for lots of other members, other states. I saw Casey give this similar presentation several times. I'm just really thankful, appreciate it. It helps us learn. It helps us work better, hopefully together in the future. And so just want to thank you, and we'll look forward to next quarter. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Are there any other commission closing remarks? Commissioner Holzman? I'm not hearing anything. Commissioner Kolkmeyer? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner.
No, I was just going to say the chair summed it up. Thank you.
Commissioner Kolkmeyer?
Yes, I believe she did, but I want to say thank you, and it was very informative, so thanks again.
And Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your efforts, and it's been very eye-opening for me.
All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for participating. I think that concludes this public meeting. We can be adjourned. Thank you.